Hey guys, say hi, Leo. Let go of the cord. Let go of the cord. Say hi. Hi. Leo and I just wanted to do a real quick introduction to this video. I am going to be showing you a video of a live stream that I did on Facebook over at facebook.com/duffthepsych. And it was a conversation about suicide. So first off, just be aware that that's what the topic of this video is going to be about. If you're sensitive to that type of content, be aware of that. I do think it's a really interesting not conversation necessarily, but a really interesting rant that I did. This was just after I had seen a client for testing feedback in my clinical practice, and the topic of suicide came up in our conversation. So I kind of just talk all about that, how you but ways that I like to talk about suicide to people, focusing on being straightforward and not shying away from the topic. So definitely take a look at that, and if you want to see more sort of off-the-cuff rants and conversations from me, definitely sign up for my Facebook page, or like my Facebook page, whatever the terminology is. Whenever I get the chance, if I have a client cancellation or I have some space between clients during the day when I'm working, I like to go live and talk about a topic that came up recently in my practice, among other things. So go to facebook.com/duffthepsych, and I hope you guys are having a really good day. Say bye. Hey, look. Hey everybody. This is a little random today. I had a client cancellation, and as I normally do during client cancellations, I try to make the most of this time, so I thought I would do a little live stream here. I had a really interesting conversation with somebody about suicide this morning, and I thought it would be interesting to talk about it here because obviously there have been a couple high-profile suicides recently, and the topic of discussing suicide, how to help people, how not to help people, things like that has come up a lot recently. And me personally, I am an advocate for talking about it, for not shying away from it. Obviously, I want to be sensitive to people who may be, triggered by the terminology and things like that. But I also think it is important to talk about, and it is important to stand up to. So in the interest of doing that, I wanted to talk about the conversation that I had with somebody just a little while ago. So I was seeing somebody for feedback for testing. I had done a neuropsychological test with them, which means I was looking at their memory, their thinking abilities, and seeing if they were having any impairment there. They're older. This is an older woman, later 70s, and she thought she was having cognitive impairment. And so I was looking into that. And today's session was just the feedback for that appointment. It turns out that she was actually doing quite well cognitively, very well for her age, actually, quite smart, and had a lot of personal strengths compared to her peers. And it turns out that what was actually driving her perceived cognitive impairment was emotional difficulties. She was having a whole lot of anxiety, and I sent home a questionnaire. It's basically like a mood questionnaire looking into psychopathology, psychological disorders, things like that. And when I got it back, I looked at the results, and I noticed that she had skipped a lot of items related to wanting to harm yourself or thoughts of death. Items like death would be a relief. She skipped that, and she skipped a lot of those. And so I wanted to touch on it. I know that she was experiencing a great deal of anxiety, but I didn't know about any of the other side of things. And so the way that I addressed it is just very straightforward. And I do always try to address it in a straightforward way when it's in a therapy context or testing, whatever it is. And I said, so I noticed that despite, the results of this evaluation overall, you did have some questions that you skipped, and there were some trends that had to do with self-harm, and it wasn't self-harm, I said, that had to do with thoughts of hurting yourself or thoughts of death. Is that something that's been a part of your experience? And that's just how I said it. And I didn't expect it necessarily, but she immediately got weepy. She started kind of tearing up, and this is a 70, almost 80-year-old woman. And so she started tearing up and getting emotional about it. And it turns out that ever since her husband passed about 8 years ago, this was something that has been a thought that's crossed her mind. There was, I'm not going to go all the way into the details, but loss of a spouse, some physical health complications for her, changes that she's noticing in her life and lifestyle and things like that. And it turns out that she had, been thinking that yes, death would be a relief because there's a lot of things that are stressful. There are a lot of things that, there's just a lot of regret about her husband passing and things of that sort. And I thought it was really interesting. We had a really good conversation about it, just talking about, I kind of reflected back to her that it's okay, even though it's been 8 years, that doesn't mean that you have to be over this person that you've been with for the majority of your life. And reflected back to her that it's okay to still be struggling with this. And, she revealed to me that she harbored a lot of regret and responsibility for his death because he had a heart attack and she couldn't save him, things of that sort. So we kind of talked through that a bit. And it's really interesting because she didn't see, this is a very smart person with a PhD actually, and she didn't see how therapy could possibly help with that. And so part of the conversation was just talking about how, with mental illness, whether it's a temporary thing like grief or an enduring thing like kind of the trait of being an anxious person, how mental health difficulties really trick you and make you think you're being logical. And you come to this conclusion that you're not going to be able to change. You've thought it all out. You've worked out all the pieces, and no amount of therapy can bring your husband back. But it still stands that people do benefit from therapy. They do get, I don't want to say better from it, like in a global sense, but they can make progress and not suffer from the effects of what it is they're going through as much as they would otherwise. The research is pretty good there for quite a few different issues. And so she just kind of had this blind spot there. Now, this is somebody who is not imminently suicidal. And in fact, one of the most important things to talk about is, why are you alive? Why haven't you killed yourself? And again, with this, I think being as straightforward as possible is really important. So I asked her, so obviously you've had thoughts that it might be nice to be gone. You've had thoughts that it would be a relief to be dead. Is this anything that you've ever planned out? That's something that I want to know. And another thing I want to know is right now, regardless of your preferences, how safe do you feel? What percentage, if you had to say 0 to 100%, how percent certain are you that you're going to be able to keep yourself safe, meaning not hurt yourself? And that's a really good question to ask because, somebody might have, I've had people who have obsessive thoughts about death, almost bordering on OCD or characteristic of OCD, where the intrusive thought of death and suicide will not get out of their head. But when you ask them how certain they are that they're going to be safe, they're 95 to 100% certain. There's no way they would ever hurt themselves or kill themselves, but the thought's always there. And so, obviously that's concerning, but that's a different story from somebody who began thinking about suicide recently, is planning something out, is imagining how it might be a relief, how these things would play out, how they can minimize damage to other people, trying to get their affairs in order, things of that sort. Two very different stories, and so, I think it's really important to realize that suicidality is not just one thing. It's a variety of different things, from thoughts to desires to plans to impulses. And so it's important to be straightforward if you can and kind of peel back the layers of that and just try to lay it out there and see what it is. A lot of people are really scared to talk about suicide with a mental health provider or a medical care provider for good reason. People are scared of being whisked off and going to the hospital, and I try to make light of it sometimes, not obviously making too light of it. It's a serious topic, but saying, look, just because you say the word suicide, it doesn't mean somebody's going to, burst through that window and come take you off to the hospital. It's not like a SWAT team is going to come in and grab you. That's not how it works. The part of this is I just want to see what's going on. And if there is anything we need to do, we can talk about it, but that's not how it's going to be, playing out. If somebody is, like I said, imminently suicidal, yes, maybe they need to go to the hospital, and that's so that you can, put some space in between them having these thoughts and them killing themselves. And that's the purpose of that. It's a medical emergency at that point. But there are so many things that come before that. The vast majority of people that I've talked to about suicide in a professional context have not been hospitalized. I mean, it's less than 1% probably. Only hospitalized. I could probably count on one hand, I think, actually, so far in my career. But I've talked about it more times than I can count with people. And so that's just important to know that just because you bring up the word, it doesn't mean you're going to be going to the hospital. And even if you did go to the hospital, sometimes that is what needs to happen, even though that's not like a preferable thing. Now I'm not going to say that it's a preferable thing to have to go to a hospital for suicide issues. But, if it comes down to it, that's what it's there for. but yeah, so bringing it up in this way was really it caused a really rich conversation, and I'm glad I had some time to just sit with her and talk about it, because maybe left unchecked, this is something that could fester and grow. She was the kind of person to not want to burden her family with this, not want to burden her friends. She's always taking care of other people, which is why she felt kind of guilty about not being able to figure it out by herself. And, you look at the picture of this person, very, very successful, serves on a dozen, boards, is very involved in the community, has a doctorate, still works at 78, all this stuff. You wouldn't necessarily expect that there's this private struggle going on. And if I hadn't asked about it, I would have never known that, so simply saying, I noticed that you skipped these questions. Have you had thoughts of suicide? That was enough for her to bring me into this private world that she doesn't share with anybody else, So when right now you're seeing a lot of things on social media about, call the suicide hotline, call the suicide hotline, things like that. I'm not going to bag on anybody for posting a suicide hotline. I do think that people know it's there already for the most part. I'm more a fan, if you are sharing something, maybe a resource that people don't already know about. Maybe there's a trans helpline, or people who are hearing impaired or something like that. That's just not as common, that people do need exposure to. But aside from that, getting this person to somebody who will ask that question. It doesn't have to be you. That's the thing that's important to realize, is that, checking on your friends is really good. If you are just beyond uncomfortable and can't bear asking them about suicide, then you don't have to. But maybe there's somebody that you could lead them toward, or somebody that you could contact who will do that, because often it's just as simple as asking. And asking isn't going to cause them to do it. A lot of people have this fear that, okay, if I say the word, I'm going to implant the idea in their mind, and then they're going to go ahead and kill themselves. And that's not how it works. Quite the opposite. Usually when it's not addressed, like with this person, if I didn't ask her, maybe nobody would have. And at this advanced age, she is one of the people in the population that is very vulnerable to suicide, because there's ailing health, there's loss of friends and family members and loved ones. There's a lot of reasons for people who do want to kill themselves at an old age. So maybe this goes, unchecked. She continues to have these regrets that build and build and build. Maybe another setback happens. She loses her best friend or something like that. And then next thing you know, things are elevated. So she is no longer, there's kind of scales, on this side you have the forces of, suicide, desire to die, things like that. And on this side, you have protective factors. So you have like family, people you don't want to leave hanging, projects, things that you're looking forward to, interests, religion for some people, anything that gives hope and a reason to stay around. And so, she's definitely like this right now, but maybe over time, if it's unchecked, it would start to do this. And then once you get over here, then you're looking at situations that could potentially be dangerous if there's some sort of catalyst there. So that's why it's important to just broach the topic, to ask about it, to put it out there, because I feel very, very confident in this person. I believe that they were telling the truth, and I believe that from here, she'll be moving in a good direction, getting some additional help and paying attention to some of these things that she's been keeping to herself because she didn't want to burden other people, realizing that it's okay for her to feel this way. It's okay to have these thoughts, but they are also worth addressing. It's not just, okay, I have these things and I'm hopeless and it's going to be this way forever. So that's kind of my shtick about it. I see that there's a few of you in here. People have been filtering in and out. I mainly recorded this for the playback views, but if anybody who's here does have any questions about this topic, I'm happy to answer a few for you. I'm just hanging out here in my office. It's actually now my lunch hour, so kombucha. I've been sipping on this kombucha for like 3 hours now, but I got a little bit left. Thank you for watching, by the way. I didn't really have too much of an agenda for this live stream. I just wanted to talk about, what I had talked about. I like when I get the chance to kind of talk about these things raw and live, because it just happened not too long ago. But does anybody have any questions for me? Otherwise, I'll probably move on and grab some food. Okay, well, I'll get going here. Again, the thing that I just want to reflect to you is, don't be afraid of talking about it. if you are afraid of talking about it, but you have concerns or you have fears for how somebody else is doing, just find some intermediary. Maybe you could talk to them through a text-based form that's less threatening to you. Maybe you could find a friend to come with you. Maybe you could talk to the parent, something like that. And that's enough, so do what you can and keep trying.